Hey everyone, I'm Jacob. I'm a machine learning engineer and developer evangelist at Voxel 51. For those of you who don't know, 51 is the leading open source toolkit for visualization and curation of visual data. And 51 plugins are an extensible framework that allow you to customize the functionality of 51 for your particular workflows. We're currently in the middle of a 10 weeks of plugin series where each week we bring you a new plugin or multiple, showing you just some of what is now possible with the 51 plugins ecosystem. And this is actually our 10th week in the series. So this is the final week. Now, plugin related content is not ending. We will just be shifting gears after this. But this is the final week of the 10 weeks of plugins. And for the final week, we decided to go a little bit meta and take all the knowledge that we've gained from these 10 weeks of building plugins and turn that into a plugin. So Brian, the CEO of Vox 51, and myself built a plugins plugin. So here we are looking at the 51 plugins repo. So this is where you will find all of the code and details related to 51 plugins. You can see there's these core plugins here, which are maintained by the Voxel 51 team. And there's also a Voxel 51 plugin, Voxel GPT, which is a great way to interact with and chat with your computer vision data. Example plugins and community plugins right here. Now, the plugins plugin is a core plugin, so you can actually access it in this core plugins table by going right here and clicking on this. So this is a meta plugin in that it is useful for management and creation of plugins. So it's a plugin for building and managing other plugins. So why is that necessary? Well, building plugins can be a little bit challenging. There's a lot of syntax you need to know. There's a lot of moving parts. There's inputs, outputs, execution. Things can be delegated or not. You can have things placed as buttons in the app, or you can have them purely executable as operators in the list that comes up when you hit the backtick or tilde button on your keyboard. So there's a lot of customizability, and in general, that requires writing a lot of code. But over the course of the entire process of building these 10 weeks of plugins, we realized that a lot of this code can actually be turned into a UI. So this is a plugin that allows you to manage your existing plugins, to install new plugins, and to create new plugins. So if we go over to the GitHub README for this plugins plugin, and I'll be swapping plugins plugin and plugin management plugin and meta plugin. They'll all be somewhat interchangeable from now on. You can, using this plugin, install new plugins. You can manage your existing plugins. You can build a component that will go in a plugin, or you can build the skeleton for an operator. So this is the scaffolding that will be necessary to actually create the plugin, the Python plugin for a particular operator. Now, we're going to go into all this a little bit more in a second, but this is just the high-level overview of what you can do with this plugin. And if you already have the latest version of the 51 plugins repo installed, then you should get this plugin already ready to go. But if you don't have that, then you can download this plugin in particular by passing in with the 51 command line interface 51 plugins download, the name of this GitHub repo, which is 51 plugins, and then this argument, plugin names, and passing in the name of this particular plugin, which is the plugins plugin. So once you do that, you can head over to the 51 app, load up any data set you like. The particular data set doesn't matter for this because this is a plugin for managing plugins, not for managing data sets or interacting with your data sets. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit the backtick or tilde button to pull up the list of operators. And we are going to type plugin or plugins in here. And then we will see all of the operators associated with the plugins plugin or the meta plugin. As mentioned, when we were looking at the README earlier, there are 4 operators. There's install plugin, manage plugins, build plugin component, and build operator skeleton. We're going to go through these one by one, starting at the top with install plugin. So when we click on install plugin, we get this nice UI that shows up, and we have 3 ways of installing plugins. The first way is by passing information that tells us about the GitHub repo. So you can pass in the URL, the ref, or a ref string. So let's say we wanted to install one of the plugins that was a community contributed plugin, or you could have this plugin just in your own GitHub repo. So here, this is one of the plugins created by a community member. We have Samu. It's line 2D. It allows you to visualize and represent like line 2D data, time series data, things like that in the FiftyOne app. We can pass the name of this GitHub repo in, or the URL here, um, and we can install by doing that. So just hit execute here, and that will install the plugin. Simple as that. If we go back to the install, click again, we can see the other two options. So if we hop on over to the Voxel 51 tab, then the UI is going to change a little bit, and we'll see this is a way to install plugins authored by the Voxel 51 team. So if we look through this list right here, we will see a bunch of options: annotation, brain, IO, indexes, plugins. Yes, that is this plugin. Utils, and so forth and so on. And this list of options here is actually the exact same thing as what was in the tables in the main README for the FiftyOne Plugins repo. So the core plugins, the Voxel 51 plugins, and the example plugins. Those are all of the options over here. And these are not hard-coded. These are actually extracted in real time when you use this operator from the README and from the tables in that README of the FiftyOne Plugins repo. So we use a Python requests library, get the response, and then do a bunch of parsing to get this information. And then you can click on any of these, and then you can install it. Yeah. So in this case, I already have this particular plugin installed. So it would just be updating it, but there's no update that actually needs to be made. If I didn't have it installed, then you could install it. The third tab is community. So if we look at this dropdown, we'll see a bunch of plugins that were in the community table over here in our FiftyOne Plugins README. So these are all of the plugins listed in this table over here. And again, this is completely real time. And so this is updated in real time. These are not hard coded. And we can see that another way to have installed the Line 2D plugin would have been this. So we could have just passed in or this option, selected this option from the dropdown, but because we already installed it, we can see that we actually would just be updating it, but there's no update that needs to be made. So this is showing us that our installation process from earlier actually worked. And it's also showing that there's flexibility. There's multiple ways to do things. All right, so we've seen how you can install new plugins. Now let's look at how we can manage existing plugins. So we'll go back to our operators list and we'll go type in plugins and we'll click on the manage plugins operator. So this has a bunch of plugins listed here, and these are all the plugins that I have downloaded and installed on my machine. And we can see the very rightmost column, there is a column for enabled. And this is a switch which we can toggle on or off. And the current state shows whether or not the particular plugin in that row is enabled. So here I have an audio retrieval plugin that is enabled. I've got an image deduplication plugin that's enabled. I have another plugin that is not enabled, and we can go through the list. Now we can turn things on or off. So let's say I want to I want to disable my PyTesseract OCR plugin. When I toggle this to off, I get this little edited text that appears right next to the switch. And then if I go down to the bottom, I will see you're about to change the state, the enablement of one plugin. If I change another one, I can turn something to off as well. We can change the enablement of two plugins. We can also do the same, turning things off to on, and we get the same effect. If we were to execute here, then we would be changing the enablement of those particular plugins. And this is a wrapper around FiftyOne plugin utils that exist in the Python SDK. It just makes them all usable via the UI. So if we were to hit execute, we would make those changes. But what if we don't want to enable or disable? We want to just look at the requirements of a particular plugin. Well, if we look at this second tab, this requirements tab in this management operator, we can see there's a selector, a drop-down, and we can choose which plugin we want from this drop-down. So let's say we want to look at our PyTesseract OCR plugin. We can click on that, and we can see that all of the requirements are installed. So we have appropriate versions of PyTesseract, Pillow, and FiftyOne, of course. So that's great. So now that we have looked at installing new plugins and managing existing plugins, it's time to talk about building plugins. So this is the part that I was most excited about because I built so many plugins now that I felt like I was copying and pasting code from one to another, and I was looking at the Python API docs for a lot of the plugins that I was building, trying to parse through what the arguments were, what the appropriate types that were allowed for certain operators were as inputs and outputs, and what the possible view types were for those data types. That was kind of a hassle. And of course, the docs are great, but sometimes we want to, if possible, simplify our life even further. And that's what these these operators do. So let's go and hit the build plugin component operator. When we do that, we see this top level component type selector. So this is a radio group, and we can select any one of these. We can either select a Boolean, a float, a message, or a radio group. And this is where things are getting a little bit meta because we are selecting things within this particular operator, the modal for this build plugin component operator that will help us to build another component. So here we can choose what group type we want our plugin to have. So let's start from the very top and let's look at our Boolean data types. So a Boolean is a true or a false. It is binary, and we can have multiple ways of representing that data visually. One way is with a checkbox. So a box like right here, which we can check off or on. Another way is with a switch, as we saw with the plugin enablement in the manage plugins operator. And this switch can be toggled on or off. Now, when I change between this checkbox and the switch, if you notice, this code in this code block changes as well. So here, when I'm at the switch option, we see switch view. But when I go to checkbox, it updates to checkbox view. Let's look at the float. So for floats, this is a number which has decimal places and has some number of digits beyond the decimal. We can represent this as a slider or a field. So here we can see a slider down here, or we can represent it as a field. We can specify min or max, step, default, any of these things. So let's say we want to set a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 10, a step of 0.3 and a default of 2, and we can set any combination of these arguments. We can see that the code is updating as we go, and this will also update. So if we go back to a slider, we can see that the default now is 2, the minimum is 0, and the maximum is 10 over here. So we see that the code is updating, and we are getting a preview of the component that we want to build, that we are constructing in real time below that. We can quickly see these for the message as well. So this is a message that you are sending to the reader in the input. There's no input for the user here. So the user can't actually specify anything themselves, but this is, you are constructing the message that you want to send to the user here. So we can specify, okay, I want this to be my label, and I'll do my message description. We can see as we do that, the message is updating, and we can see the message preview over here. That's this. We can change the type to success, or warning, or error, or header. And as we do that, again, the code is changing and the actual preview is changing. And the final one is the radio group. So this is a group of options from which a single selection can be made. So you have to choose one of them. You can represent this as a dropdown, a radio group, like what we are actually using right now, tabs, as we saw in the manage plugins and install plugins operators, or autocomplete. You can choose what these options are. So you can set default or not. You can have it be required or not. And you can go down and interact with this element that you have built as your preview. Again, the code is all updating as we go. And this allows you to interactively or dynamically create a component for a plugin that suits your particular needs. So I find myself using this component builder all the time when I'm building new plugins, and it has drastically accelerated my plugin development workflows. And the last operator that we're going to talk about is the build operator skeleton operator. So this is another meta operator. This is an operator for creating the entire scaffolding around a particular operator. And this operator is going to be the basis for a plugin that we are building. So uh, in this case, we split it up into a few steps. There is the config and placement. So you can choose your operator name. We can say, let's do this test operator. Not being original here, but that's totally fine. We can give it a label. So this is a test label description, testing, 1, 2, 3. We can choose any of these options we want, whether it to be dynamic. So it'll update based on user actions within the UI, whether we want it to have an icon. And in this case, it will just give us the code for something having an icon, but then we have to fill that icon in later. And this is a general property of this operator skeleton creation operator, in that we are not building a fully fledged plugin here. So you could go infinitely deep with this. It could be plugins all the way down. You can go incredibly flexible, incredibly customizable. But the approach that we've taken here is just to give you the scaffolding. So this will just provide the code for you that is a template to actually do the things that you want to do. So in this case, it would create the code for the place where an icon's file path would go, but it wouldn't actually give you the icon itself. So we're going to get to the input, output, and execution in a second, but before we do that, let's hop on over to this preview code tab, and we can see what it's looking like. So this is what we're building. This is what would go in our init.py file, which is where we define Python operators for our Python plugins in FiftyOne. We can see that this is the test operator right here, the name that we gave it, the label, the description, and this is the path to that particular icon. There's more stuff which we'll get to in a second, but this is just a path to icon SVG. So this will work as is, in that it won't throw any errors. It will allow you to create a plugin, but it won't have the icon that you want yet, because you need to specify that path once you have created this scaffolding or this skeleton. If we go back over and we turn off this icon, then let's go over to preview code again, and now we see the icon is gone from there. Now, let's say we want it to be dynamic. Let's go back over, call it test, my test, and then my test description. So we want it to have light icon. We want to have it be, we don't want any of these other ones. We'll keep all those unchecked. We'll say it has a placement. So let's say we want it to be in the sample grid actions. We'll give it the label, this is a button, and then we'll give it the same icon here. So the icon that we pass in, this is just a dummy path, but you could have a different icon here as well. You could, for instance, let's say I want to put in like temp / placement icon.svg. And then we do not want a placement prompt here, but you can see that this is all customizable and it will update the code as you go. Now, this, as we've mentioned before, this is not going to build the entire input or output for you, but this will help you to create the code for your logic for inputs and outputs. So we want you to be able to focus on doing the logic of the plugin. What is the actual workflow that you're interested in? What are the things that you need to pass in as input? What are the things that need to be passed as output? What are the computations or manipulations that need to happen in the execution? And if it doesn't have an input, then you don't need to worry about that. If it does, then if you toggle this to on, then it will create the scaffolding, the place where you can actually insert your logic, and same with output. Execution and delegation, this is again another state where for execution, it's impossible to know all of the ways that somebody could want to run custom code within a Python plugin. They're just too flexible for that. But you can provide some of the scaffolding and create the basic boilerplate that makes life easier for the plugin developer. And that's what we're doing here. So triggers are things that are triggered upon execution. So you can actually have another operator, either a Python operator or a JavaScript operator from this plugin or from another plugin run when your operator is executed. And here you can toggle that, or you can check that off or on. And these are just a few of the triggers you might want to do. So again, this doesn't include every possible trigger, but these are a few of the common ones. And you can choose any of these, or you can use this as, again, a template code to build off of. So we can reload samples, reload dataset. We can set the view, or we can open a panel. So if we open a panel, we can choose, again, from a couple of default panels or use this as a template to add our own panels. You can create custom panels as components in JavaScript. You can even choose the layout, whether you want these to be horizontally or vertically split with your other panels in the FiftyOne app. And then the last part is delegation. So in FiftyOne, delegated operators are a mode in which you can run operators. This was new in FiftyOne version 0.22, in which you can actually choose to have these operators run in real time or queued as jobs to be run at a later time, either on the same machine or on a different machine. So this delegation allows you to basically say, hey, I don't want this long running computation to happen in real time. I don't want to be waiting for it while I'm in the app. I want to just schedule it as a job, queue it, and then launch it from a separate process later on. So you can choose to do that. You can, in your operator creation, say, hey, I don't want to do that. I always want to do that, or I want to give the user the choice in the input form for that particular operator. So this is, again, meta, and that you're choosing whether or not to give the user the choice to delegate the operation. When you do this, there will be a custom block of code that will enable this. So now that we've done this, let's go over to our preview of code. Let's look at it again. We have our imports at the top, our operator with all the things that we've specified. We have resolve input. So this is where you will have your logic for getting inputs, for taking inputs from the user in your UI. And this execution mode right here is at the very bottom of your inputs. And this will allow you to specify whether or not the user is going to be, that's right here. This allows the user to specify whether or not they want to execute this in delegated mode or not. Go back up. We have resolve placement. So this is what's going to basically place it as a button within the samples grid actions. Resolve delegation. So this is going to take the parameter of delegation from the user. So the user can choose whether or not to delegate by basically toggling or setting this Boolean. For execution, you can put your logic here about what computations you want to run. They can be defined here or defined as separate functions that you then just call in this execute method. And then at the end of this execute, we have this trigger. So this trigger, because we chose to open a panel, is going to trigger the open panel operator, passing in these parameters for the name of the panel and the layout that we chose. Again, for resolve output, you would have your output logic here. So this is the things that you want to show the user after the execution is done. And this is not writing all the code for you. It is just writing the scaffolding so that you can focus on the logic. And at the bottom, the very bottom, we are registering this operator that we have defined with the plugin. The final step is going to be creating. So now that we have defined all the scaffolding, we have set everything for our init.py, we can create this actually. We can actually run this set of operations to create these files in the directory of our choice within our plugins repository and have this be a plugin that then shows up for us. So let's see what I mean. So for plugin name, the convention that we use is to specify your GitHub repo, and then I'll call this test plugin. The plugin description, I'll say testing on video. You can choose to put it in your plugins directory or in another directory. So in the plugins directory, you can choose a subdirectory. So here, I'll show you. If you choose other directory, then you can actually use our file explorer view to choose that. But if you don't, then you can just specify the plugins directory. And I want to put it in, this is my plugins directory. I'll put it in test plugin. And then we can execute. And now if we go back to our manage plugins, we should see this test plugin right here. So this plugin is enabled right now, which we just created. And of course, it's not throwing errors, but it will not have much functionality until you add in the inputs, outputs, and execution workflows for your particular use case. So I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope this showed you just a sense for what is possible with this meta plugin style plugin. Helps you to manage and install and create and build and build out the FiftyOne Plugins ecosystem much faster than before. It was really fun to create, but this is only the basics. So if we go back one last time to the operator skeleton, this was all very basic. So this is a very basic set of things that you are having the user specify via UI, but you can get way deeper than this. And if you want to contribute some of these things, if you want to make this more interactive and an even deeper dynamic interactive experience, please, I encourage you to reach out to us, reach out to myself or any other member of the Voxel 51 team, or to submit a PR to the 51 Plugins repo. This is a community-centric, community-focused effort, and this is built for the community. So I hope you enjoy. I hope that you have been inspired to build plugins, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you for bearing with us through this 10 weeks of plugins series, this journey, and stay tuned for much more exciting content around plugins coming, including a workshop, which we will be having shortly, as well as a hackathon and some bonus content. Thanks so much and have a good one.